everyone, and good morning, and welcome to another historian's interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is a guest making their official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today is a writer and historian with a passion for discovering meaningful stories and breathing new life into them. He is the author of Lemuria, the true story of a fake place, by Farrow House, 2024, and Raising Philadelphia, the making of America's first great city, 1750 to 1775, also 2024, by Brookline, and the editor of The Garden at Rose Break, The Garden Writings of Dandridge, 2021, Westphalia. His works have been featured in newspapers, magazines, and various online publications like Defector, Skeptical Inquirer, and The Observer, and has appeared as a guest on numerous podcasts like American Hysteria. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to our guest today, historian and writer Justin McHenry. Justin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much, Gabriel, for having me. I'm excited to talk to you about some history. It's something I love.
Nice. Very, very nice, Justin. So before we go into today's episode, as a little icebreaker question,
Okay.
is there possibly a little-known fact that most people may not know about you?
Little known fact about me that people won't know about me. Well, because of one of the books I wrote, I believe I am what can be considered a let's say a leading expert in a lost continent. So I think a lot of people don't have that claim to fame. So I am one of the leading world experts in the lost continent of Lemuria. So there you go.
Nice. Very, very nice. So you've obviously written quite a lot of amazing publications, which I'm very, very fascinated. I had a chance to look at the first two. I haven't had a chance to look at A True Story of a Fake Place yet, although the name itself really piqued my interest. And I had a chance to look at your profiles on Instagram and LinkedIn, and you are definitely someone that, as you said, you love talking about history and writing about it as well. So I'm very curious, Justin, what really put you on this path? What was some of your earliest memories of writing and history? And what definitively was the aha moment that really put you on the path to saying, this is something that I want to pursue for the rest of my life?
Yeah. So I had I think, great fortune of my grandparents would take us on trips all over the country when we were young. And so I got to see the entire, America, up into Canada, everywhere. And so as we're going around in their RV, traveling all over the places, we're visiting these historical, landmarks, Civil War battlefields, Gettysburg, Antietam, going out west and seeing all of the major national parks out there and stopping at like Lincoln's birthplace and things like Mount Rushmore. And so I think from an early age, that kind of got me started down the path of, just appreciating history some. And so, when it came time to actually go to college, I started off as a communications major. And then quickly, like the first semester, I was taking a history class, and I just kind of like, what, my heart is actually more in history. And I was loving, the class itself, and I was loving the professors. And so it was really that was my aha moment of just discovering that love within me for history and just all of the stories that are there.
Nice. And regarding your writings, when did you start writing about history? Was that kind of around the same time, or was it a little bit later?
Well, yeah, I mean, like when you're in, undergrad and grad school doing all of this work, you're kind of writing about history, a lot. But like writing for publication, that didn't come until a whole lot later because of, life responsibilities and things along those lines. And so it wasn't really until like 2019 that I started thinking about wanting to actually, write for publications and write, books and things like that, and actually be an actual historian. And it's kind of funny because as I love reading about history. I love reading histories. And so I would always flag interesting stories in those books that I'm seeing. And I just like, oh, I want to read more. I want to learn more about that. And one of the ones that stuck with me the most was I was reading this. So I'm in West Virginia. I got my master's degree in West Virginia history. And so there was a story in one of the West Virginia history journals about the Spanish influenza pandemic that happened here in the state in 1918. And there was a story about how it's first spread in the courthouse here in the Eastern Panhandle. And so that always like piqued my interest. It's like, well, what's the story behind that? And so I dug down into the story behind that, and it turned out it was like the first known case was an incarcerated Black man here in the Eastern Panhandle. And then for some bright reason, the authority just decided to put him on a train and send him across the state to another jail. And so that was kind of like a spreader event for that Spanish flu here in the state, was because they're just wanted to make a little bit extra money, transporting this prisoner across the state. So, and so finding stories like that have always been exciting for me.
Amazing. And actually, speaking of stories, I want you to tell us about probably the one that really piqued my interest. As I mentioned in the beginning, Lemuria, A Story of a Fake Place. I don't think I've ever heard of this story. So if you could, without giving too much away, even though it was already out a year ago, but for those that haven't read it, Justin, what can you tell us about this publication that you worked on?
Yeah, so Lemuria, for those who don't know, most people know what Atlantis is, the lost continent of the great lost continent of the Atlantic Ocean. So Lemuria is kind of its Pacific cousin. So Lemuria is the great lost continent of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. And so there's just so the book itself, Lemuria, A True Story of a Fake Place, is about basically all the people, like how Lemuria was created. It was created in the 1860s by a British ornithologist of all people. Just the idea of this place that was basically invented to explain how lemurs got onto Madagascar. So they created this land bridge, and because of that, they named it Lemuria. And the name stuck, and the idea of this continent, lost continent out there, kind of stuck as well. And so there was a bunch of so over the years, just a bunch of people have used that idea of this lost continent, and it kind of went into crazy, mystical places with people like, Madame Blavatsky taking it over, it getting really heavily into the New Age movement, a lot of crystals. Actually, I have a Lemurian seed crystal here now. So people believe that aliens came down to Earth and seeded the planet with these crystals to act as basically fuel, like a gas station for them.
Okay.
So they would come down here, mine the crystals, use it to power their spaceships. And so it's a very fascinating story about all the people who have kind of believed in Lemuria and how they have used it for their own purposes over the past couple of centuries.
Fascinating. That is actually really interesting. Again, I don't think I've ever heard of the story. Of course, I've heard of the story of Atlantis. Everybody has heard of the story of Atlantis, but its specific cousin, up until now, I've had no idea of what that was. So thank you, Justin. Thank you for telling us that incredible story.
And I would say Lemuria is where you go if you want a good crazy time. So Atlantis is a little bit more buttoned down. Lemuria is more of a good hangout spot.
Nice, very nice. And as our first fan question, Justin, and actually, this is actually something that you mentioned earlier. One of my viewers asked, which story in history have you discovered that deserves more recognition?
Oh, that's a good question. You know what? I would say The right now I am doing a lot of research into occult history, so
Mm,
occult and magical practices, and so I think just um, that deserves a lot more of recognition, and for how much like occult practices and magical thinking have kind of gone hand in hand with basically religious practices, mainline religious practices, predominantly, Christian and Judeo-Christian beliefs. Because right there beside of it have always been these, alternative ideas kind of going along throughout history. And so
right.
um, because of that, and because it has been vilified with Satanism and other kind of nasty things, it gets a black eye to it. But understanding the belief structures and the people behind that, because some of the people involved with occult history have played major roles in throughout history, and like the Enlightenment and the Reformation and
Mhm.
everything else. There has been a strong occult influence going on there, even like in sciences as well. I mean, alchemy and the alchemical sciences are just a precursor to modern day chemistry and like physics and things like that. So yeah, I would say that, like, just occult history and just getting a better understanding of the philosophy and the ideas behind it.
Absolutely, Justin. And I know a few colleagues that would definitely agree with you. And probably my favorite um, ocular cult history that I've uncovered in my own research is actually the cult of Simon de Montfort. Now, for those who don't know that name, that was the name of a French knight, but serving in the English court to Henry III. He was the brother-in-law to Henry III, and he was one of the pioneers of what we consider to be parliament democracy. He actually led a revolution against his brother-in-law, but unfortunately he was killed by his godson, if I remember the history correct, who of course was Edward Longshanks. Yes, viewers and listeners, that Edward Longshanks from the William Wallace story. And after his death, and I want to say 1265, the surviving knights actually gathered his body and hid his bones and had places of worship to keep the revolution alive. And to prevent any more discourse between the monarchy and the peasant class, King Henry, one of his last decrees before his passing and his son taking over, was pardoning Simon de Montfort, albeit for a brief period, at least to stop the rabbles. And that, I think, is like a very fascinating piece because, again, as you mentioned, Justin, cult history and occult history during the medieval age, the Reformation, is so very fascinating. And you're right, it often does get vilified with Satanism and so forth, but it goes a little beyond that. It's existed way before that concept even came about, which again is one of the most beautiful things about history, is kind of filling in the gaps and actually making corrections when needed. And still on the topic of history, Justin, another fan question one of my viewers asked is, as an historian, what have you learned about the business side of being a historian in terms of promoting your research, growing your brand, so to speak, to showcase, who you are in the field?
Yeah, it's very difficult because there's so many competing, you know, so many competing voices for people's time out there. And
Mhm.
so just getting your message across and getting yourself discovered is always like the biggest hurdle out there. I think if you have a good story and can tell it well, you can always find a place to, publish that. It might not be for a lot of money, might not be for any money, but there are, with some research, or with some research online, you can find online publications or magazines or even local newspapers or things along those lines that will publish your work. But but that's like half the battle. The other half is actually, getting people to read that and to engage with you. And so that's always the tricky and difficult part. And so it's just about, making connections like with yourself and others, and just trying to, spread the word as best you can about, yourself and your work and all of that too. And it's also about, one thing I have struggled with is about being consistent, and especially if you're doing social media and things along those lines. It's about, creating a good, consistent flow of content for people to consume and think about you too.
Absolutely. And that's something we're going to be touching on. We get to more of the business side of being an historian. Now, kind of going back in time a little bit, Justin, once you graduated with your degrees in history, what really surprised you about the field that was like a shock, so to speak?
I think the biggest shock was right out of grad school, I was able to find a historical research job, which was very lucky. I'm lucky to be in the kind of DC metro area, and so I got to travel to the National Archives on a daily basis to do research there, and that was very, very cool. And so I guess the biggest shock is that there are jobs out there in this field. You might have to be a little creative in finding those. So my degrees are in history and they're not in library sciences, but I have managed to fall into some archival jobs just with that background in records management and history. And so I've been lucky there in finding those kind of like archives managers jobs, and using that as a way of being able to, work hands-on with history on like a day-to-day basis.
Very true. Very, very true. Now, also, when you graduated from college, what sort of the reaction like from friends and family? Actually, let me go back a little bit. When you decided to go into college and pursue your degrees in history, what was the reaction like from friends and family who learned that you were pursuing this? And the reason why I asked this, I asked a lot of historians on the channel this particular question because being a historian is, it's not a get rich quick money maker. And what I've learned from other colleagues on the show is that truly what a historian is, it's not just about, knowing a specific time, place, area of focus. It's how to interpret sources in a particular way and style analytically and so forth. So I'm very curious, when you told your friends and family that you were going into history as a degree and possibly career, what was that reaction like?
I think it was mostly positive. They were mostly supportive, maybe some questioning about like, what do you plan to do afterwards and things along those lines. But I think you'll have that with a lot of jobs. But also, like you were mentioning about the underlying core skills of a historian, and a lot of those are marketable and for organizations, because at the very, very core of what you do as a historian is basically data analytics. It's you're collecting all of this data, which is your historical sources, and you're interpreting them, analyzing them in a way, and producing an output. And so that's a skill that can be transposed onto many, many different careers. It doesn't have to be historically related, but you won't necessarily go destitute if you with those skills too.
Very true. Very, very true. And kind of with that in mind, just like, anything, we all deal with this form of writer's block and stuff like that. And for you in particular, Justin, when you were writing your publications, your books, how did you overcome your writer's block?
Luckily with history, when I do get writer's block, I can still feel productive by just doing the research and reading and collecting the information from those readings and those sources. And so that does help kind of like push the ball down the road a little bit, until I do find some inspiration to, actually take that material and turn it into an actual article or a book or something along those lines. But yeah, like it's kind of a built-in writer's block, workaround, is that there's always something to read, there's always something to take notes on and things like that. And so and also, when I found too, it's not so much writer's block that gets me, because especially writing the first book, Lemuria, it was all about just getting words onto the page, and then the inspiration will come as I'm editing. So that does help as well. So just kind of teaching yourself not to like edit while typing, but just throwing whatever words to get the ideas down on paper, and then afterwards I've always found it easier for me to edit than to write. And so the writing part, just make it as basic and simple as possible, and then 15 rounds of editing later, you're chiseling it away to make something tolerable and digestible for public consumption.
Absolutely. Very true. And now we're going to go into a few reflective questions. I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, Justin. Now, the first one focuses on what does it mean to be an historian in the digital age? Because the field has greatly changed. And as historians, I've seen a lot of us have social media profiles to showcase our work now. And I think that is very, very good to have, because let's face it, the digital age, it seems to be a necessary thing to have for our research and for promoting who we are in the field. But social media can be very exhausting, very emotionally draining, and just very tiring. Yes, we can reach new people and have thoughtful and engaging discussions, but unfortunately, sometimes we do leave ourselves exposed to the negative side of social media. And I've also seen this debate on social media, and I've talked with others on the show, this debate between, academically trained historians and those that will be called by the internet armchair historians, of like, who is considered truly an historian, who is just a history enthusiast or buff, and so forth. It gets very, very volatile very, very quickly. So ultimately, Justin, my question to you is, with all that said and more, what has still disciplined you to be the historian you want to be, writing about the things you are passionate about, and presenting history in a way that is still thought-provoking, but easily consumable for the average reader?
Yeah. So I think it boils down to what you want from your own self and what you're looking for to produce. If you're looking just to spread the word of history, or if you have a particular topic that you're interested in, it's about what do you want from that yourself. Is it just to reach as many people as possible? Because if that's the case, then maybe you don't write the book. Maybe you start a YouTube channel, you start a podcast, or you start just do a series of like TikTok videos and things like that on the topic, because that will potentially reach a larger audience than a book, which does require a lot more time and effort and actual money from people to actually to use that or to get that and sit down with it, because that's a big ask for people, especially in this day and age. But like for myself, like the highest form of art for me is writing a book and producing a book, and some of my favorite things in the world are books themselves. And so I like that challenge of going out there and writing books, or writing long form articles on the topic. And so that's not going to, telling those stories that way is not going to have the reach that it will when you possibly doing a YouTube channel or putting out videos or doing a podcast or something along those lines. But it's something that I want to do, and I look forward, and I find that exciting. And so it's just a personal thing that you should, like a personal conversation you should be having with yourself in your head about what goals do you want to produce. And then for, yeah, like the armchair historians and the academically trained historians, there's a disconnect there too, like just because I think a lot of popular historians want to just tell the story, while academic historians want to analyze the story and find meaning in it. And it's two sides of the same coin, but it's also like, think of it like I don't know, like movie directors. And so like, Steven Spielberg tends to want to tell the most, crowd pleasing kind of stories, while someone like, Ingmar Bergman or something like that wants to really analyze the human condition and things like that. Both are making great movies or films, but they're just coming at it from different aspects and different points. And so I think you have that with popular historians who are just creating kind of like historical content, maybe, are just wanting to get that story across, while academic historians are wanting to try to find some sort of meaning from what was happening back in the past. And that also tends to be very, very specialized and specific too, like focusing on 19th century rug makers and the Hudson Valley or something like that. So
that's a very good comparison, Justin. And another thing that I want to hear your thoughts on is probably something that has been impacting the field of history, and what I've seen on, let's say, YouTube, is AI in the field of history when it comes to AI narrated historical content or AI research content in the field of history. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. And AI definitely is this tricky thing because it's always going to be in every program we use. But I think a lot of my colleagues definitely agree that AI can definitely be helpful when in terms of, organizing research and planning it out. But like anything, it does not have a place in terms of creating content, especially historical and academic research papers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's a tool, like, and it just needs to be used appropriately. So not creating actual stuff, but organizing and providing maybe some ideas on how to approach things as well. Too. But also, like, a lot of historical work, especially on the academic side, revolves around getting into the archives and looking at these ledgers and these letters and things like that just aren't available or cannot be processed by AI, at least at this moment. Or so yeah, it's just very tricky because if you're using AI to create your content, the pool sources to find that information, it's going to be very shallow and it's going to be very baseline, basic kind of stuff. But as a historian, you should want to dig deeper. That's the whole point of it. That's the whole fun of it too. It's just to dig deeper and finding the base, like, human the human aspects of it. And that's a note actually I keep on my board here, is finding the human everything. And so just making those human connections in the sources that you're finding and in the letters and in the in the reports that are out there and everything else. Like, there's a human element to that went into creating that, and you don't see that when you're just plugging in a bunch of sources that you find online and it's regurgitating out to you. So there's no connection points there.
Very true. Absolutely very true, Justin. And that kind of goes now perfectly into the business side of being an historian. Now, the little icebreaker for this segment, Justin, we're going to talk about your publications. Now, when you first began writing your books, in terms of marketing them and promoting them, looking back, is there anything you would have done differently?
That's a good one. I would say Probably not, especially with Lemuria, just because, like, it's a side gig. It's a side thing. I have a full-time job. I got a family. I got other things, pooling at my time and place. So you have to really you know make those hard decisions on yourself about what are you willing to sacrifice to promote your work, how much time and effort um, do you want to put into that. So I could have sent, I've sent, hundreds of emails for it, but you can always send, I guess, 100 more emails to try to reach more people or have more opportunities, or just because of like all of those, life opportunities or life responsibilities on me, I didn't feel comfortable like going out and going to traveling and doing speaking engagements or things like that. So that might be something in the future for other projects I'm working on, maybe that will be an option for me, or maybe I can seek more opportunities to like actually get out to see people one-on-one instead of just, over videos like this and things like that. So maybe that's one of the opportunities that I would do over again, is maybe do more, try to do more speaking engagements and connecting on that matter.
Okay. And on the topic of connection, that goes into another thing I wanted to hear your thoughts on, which is understanding the audience. And I think this is very, very interesting to talk about with historians who are authors, because going back previously, we are both academically trained and we are taught to write a certain way for a particular audience. But when we are writing books for publication, we really have to take into account, okay, if we're writing this for the general audience, they're not going to pick up the academic jargon that we and others will know. There has to be this fine balance between the academic reader that we are trying to write towards, as well as the general history enthusiast who may pick this book up. Also maintain our authenticity and the authenticity of the research. We don't want to dumb it down, but we also don't want to overwhelm them. And it's this very delicate equilibrium we have to balance and showcase. So for you, Justin, and all of your publications and your magazine articles that you have written, how have you maintained this delicate balance?
That's another good one. It's really about that's primarily why I didn't like continue on to look for a PhD in history as well, just because I do not enjoy academic writing whatsoever. It's just not who I am. I'm more of a loosey goosey, little bit more, I guess, entertainment focused, or wanting to have a little bit more maybe wit and humor in what I'm doing, as opposed to the dryness that you find in a lot of like, academic journals and academic manuscripts that are out there. So when it comes to that scale, I'm always going to lean more towards being presenting it in a more popular, fashion. But there's a lot of I do appreciate the analysis that comes from academic writing, and the what gets drilled into you when you're doing your graduate work and everything else is like just really contextualizing everything that's going on. And so I think that's a lot. That's what's missing from all of these kind of like content created stuff, is the really providing a good analysis of the context of why it was happening, when it was happening, and who was it happening to, and how it was happening, and all of that kind of information. And so it's finding that right balance of, inserting that context, but inserting just finding it the right amount, so it's not overwhelming the actual narrative that you're putting forward.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And this is another fan question, which, okay, this is a new one. I haven't gotten this one before. This one's kind of a more personalized fan question, Justin. This viewer asks if you have seen the newest movie, Nuremberg, and from a historian's perspective, how accurate do you think that film was to the depiction of not only the trials itself, but the lead up to the trials, what led to the trials being made?
That's a good one. I have not seen it, so I can't really speak to it, but I do have an interesting aspect on that because
Okay.
one of the being a West Virginia historian, one of the people who worked on the Nuremberg trials was a man by the name of Ken Heckler, who was a West Virginia's Secretary of State for long, like 20 years. But he was also in the Army. He wrote the book, The Battle of Ramagen. It was turned into a movie in the 60s too, one of those like, schlocky kind of 60s war movies. But it's a pretty good book. But he was a Army officer who was responsible for interviewing people like Goering and other Nazi captured Nazis officers after the regime fell there. And so I would be interested to see, especially I didn't know that was part of it, the looking at the build up to the actual trial itself. So it would be interesting to see, how that's all presented and things like that, because it was a lot of, I think that's knowing about Ken Heckler and what he was doing with it, maybe gives me an appreciation, at least, that there's a lot of people working a long time, gathering as much information as possible, and they did a decent job of destroying all of the records, they being the Nazis, of destroying the records. And so finding what records were left over about the atrocities that they committed, and trying to piece together this criminal case. Have you seen the movie?
Yes, I have. It is a very, very intense film. Just seeing the lead up to it, the relationship that is born from the psychiatrist who has to evaluate Goring and the other high-ranking officials, and just pretty much how it was a gamble. The Nuremberg trials were an absolute gamble. So for any history buff or World War II enthusiast, film enthusiast that has not yet seen Nuremberg, I highly recommend watching it, because you will not say a word from beginning to end. I'm not even joking. It is that engaging and that intense of a film.
That's good. I've heard it's a good return to form too for Russell Crowe, which I'm excited for.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And another fan question, which, okay, this is another good one, Justin. Is another personal question. So this viewer asks, as a reader, Justin, have you ever come across a field of history that often gets written too much? And do you feel there are other aspects or other topics in history that deserve further discussion and publication?
Oh yeah. Just a personal, like I keep harking on my West Virginia-ness, but the primary thing West Virginia is known for is the coal mining industry, and the primary thing in West Virginia history is studying coal mining and the extractive industries, and the influence that is played on the state's history. As someone who has lived in the States my entire life, I have only known and met one coal miner in my time. So I think something like that has been, I don't want to say overblown, but it's been studied enough. And so there's definitely a lot of different areas that could be studied. Along those same lines, I think the focus on most history has been war related. And so trying to find a way of making social and cultural history as entertaining as war history would be a good one to go about too, just because, I mean, the Civil War is done to has been done every which way. World War One, World War no, not, maybe not so much World War One, but World War Two definitely. Vietnam War. So all of those wars have been studied, and so maybe it's time to look at trying to find ways of popularizing what was going on maybe in the home front. And there are some popular books that have been written on that, but not a lot, not many. So I would say just focusing more on like social and cultural history, what's going on with, the people, and not so much, the people in power.
That's very good. That's very good, Justin. And another aspect of the business side of being a historian, which I'm very eager to hear your thoughts on, is networking. Networking is essential for us in the field, or pretty much networking for anyone in general is vital, because the amount of people that we know and who we know leads to more doors and possibilities. So for you, Justin, are there any people you would like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you in your field of history and just in your professional life as an historian in general? And also, in your opinion, how important is it for those to begin networking or to consider networking?
Well, it's very important, just because now in the job market, so many jobs are just are decided upon just who you know, and just not even like who you know in like a personal sense, but just having your name on their mind, even in like just the littlest sense, just so they can say, oh, this person, I know who this is. So that might get you, you're a toe in the door, as opposed to just not like cold applying for jobs and then things along those lines. So that is greatly helpful, especially with writing as well. It is very hard to make those initial connections with editors, with publishers, with publications themselves. Cold pitching stories is never a fun thing to do. And you get a lot of rejections, and you get a lot of no replies and things like that. And so just, making that one connection and having that one publication do it, that can help lead to the next one. So it just creates like a daisy chain effect for your.
Yes, absolutely. Could not agree more. And now, Justin, we're actually going to do some rapid fire fan questions to try to throw you off a little bit. And some of these are really, really good. I had a chance to look at these beforehand, and I think these are very, very intriguing. Okay, here is the first fan question. In your opinion, which is the least researched field of history?
Least research field in history. That's a tough one, because as an American, we have a privileged position. At least I am in a privileged position of being able to access a lot of records. So I would say the least ones would be maybe from an American standpoint, indigenous history, just because of the it's so oral tradition, especially dating back, pre-reservation era. And then from a world history standpoint, I would say like African history would be pretty well not regarded. I haven't seen a lot of good maybe English translated African histories that are out there. Same with some Asian countries as well. I really wanted to read up on Korean history, but there are just not a lot of English translated histories of like certain events in Korean history. And so that's been difficult to find too.
Very true. Very, very true. And okay, here's the next one. So I'm going to get a preface for this, viewers and listeners. This is not to throw shade on any academic scholars or their work. This is mainly on books that have been used frequently in research and those that have not been used frequently. So here are the follow-up questions, Justin. Most overrated academic book or work. Again, no shade to any scholars. Yeah. It's just on if they've been used frequently a lot.
Oof. I'm going through my grad school phase and trying to figure out what has been used a lot, academic wise too. I will say the it's escaping my mind. It's a World War I history book. It's Eckstein. Well, you know what? I'll forget that. It's not really academic. History book, and it's going to be a weird one to say because it's going to be. But I never liked the periodic table by Primo Levi. I just didn't like the writing of it for whatever reason. It was never connected with it. I think there's a lot other better history books out there, or even firsthand experience books of the Holocaust. So that would be mine. It's just maybe avoiding Primo Levi and the periodic table when you're trying to learn more about the Holocaust.
All right. Next one, most underrated historical. We'll go historical nonfiction to make it easier. Historical nonfiction.
Oh man. Okay. Let me look this up real quick because there is one book that I absolutely love. It's on the American Revolution. The American Revolution, naval aspects, naval history book. Let me see if it comes up real quick. The Struggle for Sea Power by Sam Willis. It's amazing. It's a really, really well done history book of the naval aspects of the Revolutionary War. And so it's witty and just well written, and it covers everything. So it's one, especially if you're interested in the Revolutionary War era, it's definitely one to pick up.
Absolutely. This one I think is a little fun one, a little cheeky. Most unrealistic stereotype about historians.
That we're all just dorks, I guess, and nerds. So, which I mean, it might be true, but we're other things as well.
Yes,
we're so much other things.
That is very, very true. That is 100% true, Justin.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, there's a lot of these rapid fire, so I'm trying to find one that I haven't used. Okay. This one is interesting. Okay, I'm gonna try to reword this in a way. Which do you think draws people to history? Emotional aspects or a conflict aspect?
For me, it's emotional. So I like to think that that's what draws most people into history, is finding that just a connection, like any kind of connection point, is what's best for, telling the history.
All right. And now we're going to the final one before we get into the last few questions, Justin. And again, I gotta scroll through. I have like so many. It is absolutely ridiculous. Ooh, okay. This kind of goes back to what we just talked about earlier. Okay, so this focuses on one of your three works, Justin. And this viewer asks, very, very long ones. I want to try to summarize it. Which of your publications would you love to see fleshed out into its own historical documentary?
That's a good one. I think Lemuria would make a good documentary just because it does touch upon so many weird aspects of history and alternative spirituality. But I think the best one is in my book, Raising Philadelphia. The very last chapter deals with Philadelphia in 1775. And so I think that would be a good documentary, just because so much was happening in the city during that crucial year. That's when the actual war itself got started. And they send, Washington came with the Second Continental Congress. They shipped him out to Boston to continue on the war. So you have the Continental Congress continually meeting there, and people moving back and forth. You have a lot of radicalization going on right then and there too. Thomas Paine comes to America and lives in Philadelphia throughout 1775, and he starts writing Common Sense, which changes America forever, in December of 1775. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff. There's the first abolitionist group that gets started in 1775 in Philadelphia. So you have all of these great and impactful things going on at that time period. And so I think that would make it very interesting. And there was a hurricane that came through the town too in that year too. So this is a bunch going on. So and I think that would make probably the most coherent and good, concise kind of documentary.
All right. And now, Justin, we arrive at the final question of this incredible historian's interview. We talked about a lot of things. We talked about your books, why you got into history, what you learned from it, and so forth. So ultimately, at the end of the day, Justin, what do you want people to take away from not only your books and your research, but your goal and promise to your fans and fellow history enthusiasts?
I want them to take away that what the human aspect of everything that was going on. And so the people during whatever time period that you're interested in, they are not so different than you. They have the same desires, they have the same wants, they have the same, they have the same responsibilities that were placed upon them as well. There are very much the same as you, and they're going through these, incredible, life-changing, world-changing, history-changing events. And so that gives you a good perspective on like what's going now in the world. And so whatever that might be, or whatever, viewpoint that you might have of that. And so it gives you a good perspective on the now and also on the past. You brought this up about the, what was the, like, what do you, relate to, like either the emotional aspect or the conflict aspect. So one of the best things I have ever seen in my archival days is coming across these just notes, basically, like just notes from the 18th century, just from some clerk, writing in Pennsylvania. And so he's writing out all these notes, he's writing these letters, but on the side he's like just doodling. And so you see these little doodles, you see these little scribbles, you see these drawings of people and or faces or peacocks or whatever. And it clicked on me. It was like, this guy was just at his job trying to like end his day, finish out his day. And he does what, everybody else does in the world and just endlessly doodle. And so, so even 300 years ago, there were people just like you, just wanting to get through the day and doing anything they can to just get through that day. And so that was going on 300 years before them, and that will go on 300 years after us. And so it's just knowing those universal aspects of just the humanity of it all is really what I like to kind of present to people, and hopefully people can, connect with that.
Beautifully said, Justin. Beautifully said. And with that, viewers and listeners, we conclude another amazing historian's interview here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to Justin McHenry for coming on the show. And Justin, where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as buy copies of your books and magazines for the ones that you've been featured in?
Yeah, so you can reach me. I'm on Instagram mostly at Justin Loves History. You can find my books anywhere you buy books. They're on, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, bookshop.org. You can find them there. You can visit my website, www.justinjmchenry.com, and that will have links to all of the other stuff I've written out there too.
Nice. I will link all that down below in the description of this video, viewers and listeners. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode here on the channel. A huge thank you to Justin for coming on the show. And also, viewers and listeners, if you've been following my posts, know that there are only 3 weeks, actually less than 3 weeks left to pre-order a copy of Decimus, The Wolf of Rome. I will provide a link down below. It'll be the Goodreads link, which will get you access to the link to Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. So if you haven't pre-ordered a copy yet, I highly recommend you do so. Avoid waiting in line. And until next time, viewers and listeners, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with all new information coming out later this week as well as later this month. And as always, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the next episode.